Looks like it's pretty slow today, but it's happening. All right. So welcome to the Diagnostic Working Group meeting, October 14th, 2020. To start with, are there any announcements?
Nothing super major, but I'm currently working on a rewrite of Promise Hook, well, a parallel version of Promise Hook that uses JavaScript functions instead of C++ functions, so we can bypass like all of the overhead of that. So it should be pretty helpful in speeding up Promise performance in async hooks.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a link or anything which you can paste it in the chat?
I have, hang on. Well, I have a Chromium review. It's kind of half done right now, and I have some local changes that haven't been synced to that yet. But that's kind of just a quick hack together new Promise Hook API. But yeah, that lets you register, like rather than having one C++ function to handle all hooks, you handle each type of hook as a separate function. And so it'll check if it needs to even run anything for each individual type of hook, which should have somewhat better performance. And it's all like JavaScript functions, so it can insert it in place in the in the bytecode assembler. So well, most places it can insert it in place. So it should make a lot of it quite a bit faster. There's a handful of places where the event needs to be triggered within a runtime function, which I think that won't really have as good a performance as the ideal, but I'm still kind of working through to see like what I can pull out into generated code. It's complicated, and how promises are generated in V8 is kind of a big tangled mess. So it's hard to figure out exactly where to put things to get the best performance, but doing what I can.
Okay. Any other announcements, or we go with the regular agenda? Okay, the first one in the regular agenda is 35534, which is add span API to diagnostic channel. Stephen?
Yeah, so I've been working on diagnostics channel, and I have two issues in the agenda that I basically pulled out some features that I guess were controversial to some extent, or just couldn't as easily get consensus on them. The span API is the first one, which there just wasn't really enough consensus on like what a contact like what a correlation API should look like. Like it's not like span specifically. Like the ultimate intent is just we need to be able to like say that a bunch of events are related in some way. So like say we have diagnostics channel in an HTTP server, we want to be able to say that like all of these events happen within the same request in this HTTP server. So you might have like a request started, like response ended, like a done parsing the body or something like that. Like done the body stream. Might be like a handful of events like that. You want to be able to correlate all of them to the same request. So there needs to be some sort of like correlation identifier to link them all together. So I put forth this span API idea, which is the pretty basic object that just when you construct it, it emits a start, and it has annotation events. You can have any number of them in the middle, and then there's an end to delineate the like this is the end of correlation events for this correlation ID, and like all it does is attach an ID to this chunk of data. But like the particular shape of the API, I think people were uncertain about. So yeah, I pulled it out to this separate pull request and needs some more, I guess, review, feedback, iteration, whatever needs to happen to get it to a state that we're comfortable landing it.
Yeah. Any questions on span API or the diagnostic channel?
Sorry, muted. The only question I had is, like, just does it need to be a separate API versus like an optional span field in the existing APIs?
Yeah, the exact shape of it doesn't really matter that much. It's just the general concept of APM wants to be able to link a bunch of events together in some way. So
Yep.
There needs to be at some level a correlation ID saying like these two things are from the same thing.
Right.
How that is delivered is largely irrelevant as long as it works.
Yeah, the concept to me, absolutely, I see that the need for that. I was just wondering, like, I could see it is, when you actually say here's an event, if there was just an optional span ID, that would be might be a smaller change or less complicated or than a separate API. And I'm just, it may be that no, you need something more sophisticated and, a separate API makes sense. I was just wondering on that front though.
Yeah, it's mainly just, we need a shared ID between things. There is an advantage to also having a clear delineation of a start and end, just for like cleanup purposes. It makes it easier, but it's not strictly required. Like we could stuff things in a weak map or something, but it's just easier if we have something like the current API that has a little more clear like encapsulation of the lifetime of this thing. But yeah,
right, because I guess it has a create this thing, I'm done with this thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the next step on this is to have a review on the PR and have discussion on the PR itself for further iterations and conversions. The next one in the agenda is 35532, which is channel async iterable. Was this discussed in conjunction with the span itself or needs a separate discussion?
It's a separate discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, async iterable channels are like basically like a channel is like a stream. It's a sequence of events. So I just had this idea to just make the channel object an async iterable. So you can just use like a for await loop over it to get the messages out of it. It's not really very important. It was just like kind of nice to have idea, and I tried it out and tried to see if it was valuable to anyone. But didn't really get any real feedback on it. And like it does add a little bit of extra complexity. Like it's fairly self-contained, but it does add a little bit of extra code that needs to be maintained, I guess. So it's just a matter of deciding, like, does this provide enough value that we should bother with it?
So I was just wondering whether the channel will be consumed by the sink or the endpoints in the form of a stream, as opposed to an iterable enumeration.
So I think the typical use of it would just be like directly with the subscribe API, which you just have, it's like an event handler. You just have a function that is called whenever a message comes in. But yeah, having a way to consume all the events as a stream may be an advantage to some. Yeah.
I mean, on this one, I'd be tempted if you're not getting pull, like for a new feature, and like trying, working towards getting it non-experimental. It might be easier if there's less surface area.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I pulled it out to a separate pull request, because like the core diagnostics channel PR itself now is fairly simple, fairly non-controversial. And so like I think that's mostly in a state that like people would be okay with landing that. And then it's just this like span API and the async iterable API that I just pulled out because like it's code that's already done. So if we want it, we can do something with it. If we don't want it, we can close the PR. But yeah, just figured I'd put it there to let people comment if it's a thing that they care about.
On the PR, have a comment about changing the active channel interface to a C++ interface. Why this change is good?
Sorry, I didn't hear all of
that. On the active channel, Diagnostics channel.js, on the PR, have a comment about to change the interface to C++. I don't understand the motivation to change this to C++.
In the diagnostics channel PR itself?
No, async iterable. The issue 35532. The PR.
You probably
you put in the
well the first couple of commits in that PR are from the diagnostics channel PR it's only the last commit that's actually relevant.
Okay.
Yeah,
The rest is
that PR
about the
depends
diagnostic channel.
that PR depends on the diagnostics channel. Same with the span API. It has the diagnostics channel PR itself within it.
Okay.
But that comment. Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to now. That's just a reminder. Like, so far, I don't think there's anywhere that we actually need to emit data to channels in C++ anywhere. But if we do discover somewhere that we actually want data from in C++, we'll have to make some sort of interface to connect a C++ side version of this to the JavaScript side. And haven't really thought too deeply about what that would look like, or, like I said, if we even need it.
And would that be for like native modules?
Yeah, native modules are like, most of the use case of diagnostics channel is for core. It's
Right.
just emitting core related stuff, and like specifically being able to insert events anywhere that there's like an async barrier that we want to capture data about that.
Right. Okay. So it's still, but I was just wondering if it was external. So it sounds like no, it would be still node core, but in C++ code versus JavaScript.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It may potentially have a like user-facing C++ interface as well someday, maybe. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Okay. I was just thinking in that case, it probably shouldn't be C++. It should be possibly something exposed through an API, which is a C interface, but it doesn't sound like that's the short-term concern anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one in the agenda is 35286. Proposal mark async resource and async local storage as stable.
So that had some comments. Async resource seems to be fairly uncontroversial, that it should probably be considered stable at this point. Async local storage, I think the consensus was we should let it bake a bit longer. And there was like a bunch of discussion around the enter with method specifically, which Bradley seemed to be not too fond of. So we'll have to figure out something we can do with that to make it more acceptable.
I think we need to, I think if I remember the discussion, we need to define the exit criteria for async local storage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we discussed last week.
Yeah, we want to try and like set a not exactly a deadline, but like a goal that like ideally we should be able to call this stable by some version, node 16 maybe, I don't know. But we should work towards a point that we can call it stable and have some actual intent of doing that rather than just letting it experimental forever and ever.
I think it should be the like, here's what we think we need to do. Like these 5 things, once they're complete, we think it's ready and we're hoping to get it done. Like, you know, the proposal is 16 or 17 or whatever, right?
Yeah. And the main concern I had with all of it was just the pushback against the enter with. So we'll have to figure out a better way to do that. It's like enter with is the main API that's needed by APM. And there seemed to be some disagreement that it should be allowed.
Do we need to consider async resource and async local storage together in terms of their maturity models? Meaning, can we have async resource exit the experimental separately from async local storage?
Yeah, they can definitely exit separately. It's only really I only really proposed them together because I was thinking of both of them at the same time, and like at least in my use case, the combination of the two is where we get the advantage. Marking async resource on its own as stable has a little bit less advantage because it's basically feeding into an unstable API, whether that's async hooks or async local storage. So it's maybe less critical that it's considered stable immediately, but also it does mean that we could at least get the ecosystem and start adopting it, and hopefully by the time async local storage is considered stable, enough async resource usage would exist in the wild that we could just turn on async local storage as stable and suddenly all this stuff just works.
Yeah, I thought one of the comments was that it will it'll make it easier to get the modules who need to incorporate it.
Yeah, that was the main motivation for trying to mark async resource as stable.
Yeah.
Just because there's several modules. I think Mongoose was one of them that have like some sort of internal queuing system that breaks continuation, and they refuse to use async resource because it's considered experimental, even though it hasn't changed at all in like literally years.
But I can understand that, right? Like I could see projects just saying we just don't use anything that's experimental, and and so it's go ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like in this case we kind of have this like label that doesn't represent reality. It's like async resource effectively has been stable for years now. We just didn't call it stable. That's how I see it anyway.
That's more just we failed to go through the process of making it like officially stable, right?
Yeah.
But it's different consumers, right? So I can see it like the consumers of async resource are the modules we want to have, use it, and then the consumers of async local storage are actually the APMs. And so you could easily see the case where the modules are like, well, we don't want to do all this work until we know this part's stable. But the APMs may be able to say, well, we're more willing to deal with, an experimental API that might change on us, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of part of why async resource was left to sit for so long, is because like on its own, it's not really useful.
Right.
Like it doesn't do anything for anyone that's not using experimental APIs.
Right. But at this point, it sounded like there was at least a few people saying, hey, it would be useful to try and, get people to adopt that. And then it will benefit the people who are willing to use the async local storage API, even if it is experimental.
Yeah. To me, async resource could be considered as stable separately from async local storage, or if we wanted to bundle the two together, that's fine too, I guess. the only real advantage to marking async resource as stable before async local storage is we get a little bit of head start on trying to get the ecosystem to adopt it, which helps a little bit to make async local storage more stable as well. Just because, like, if there is context loss, then async local storage is going to be impacted by that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess though we got to come up with the proposal for like somebody would need to like do the PR to make async local storage stable separately, or we could just wait until it's like we're ready on the async local storage exit criteria too. It seemed like from the discussion of the PR, there wasn't any objections to async local storage. Sorry, async resource going stable now.
Yeah, I didn't really see any objections either. It was pretty much consensus that it's like de facto stable as it is now. And yeah, the whole discussion was all just about async local storage. Is like needs a little more time to bake, basically.
There is no PR open, right? It's just a issue 35286.
Yeah, it's just like a suggestion that we should do this.
Yeah. Basically to gather the consensus. Yeah. So I believe the next step here would be just to place the exit criteria items. If I remember, we have the exit criteria, standard exit criteria, which is defined for worker threads, diagnostic report, etc., which recently exited experimental status. The high-level criteria would remain the same. There would be something private to this particular feature. Placing that in this issue and people looking at that and making a tick mark, checklist kind of thing makes sense to me. If you want, I can gather those information from those features.
Sure, yeah, just any exit criteria information that you can share there would help.
Sure, I will gather that post this meeting. Yeah. The next one in the agenda is 34895, create diagnostic channel module.
Yeah, so that already kind of reached into that one a little bit a couple times, but yeah, it's at this point been stripped down to just the essentials. It seems to be fairly uncontroversial at this point and got a bunch of approvals. Recently, there's a small bit of discussion about putting it under the node prefix namespace, which apparently only exists in ES modules currently. So that would require adding support to CommonJS before we could consider doing that. So I left a comment recently just asking, like, is this suggestion blocking this in any way? So it's not clear if it should or not.
See right there. It sounds like the plan is like, likely a Semper minor at 15 in some point, right? So there's no rush for that discussion to conclude.
Yeah, we figured out last meeting, I guess, that or no, at the after the TSC meeting recently, that it doesn't actually need to be a major change.
Okay.
But then after that, the node prefix suggestion came up. I think Miles suggested that, And there's kind of a bunch of discussion after that, which was like, this doesn't actually exist in CommonJS yet, and then like, what would we have to do to make this exist in CommonJS? And then some comments that adding it to CommonJS could probably be considered assembly reminder as well, so we could possibly like add support for the node prefix to CommonJS as a minor in 15, and then after that is added, do another minor adding diagnostics channel, maybe. There's no specific comments that diagnostics channel should be blocked by that. So I'm trying to find out if anyone actually thinks it should be or not.
Okay.
It's kind of a whole discussion that should probably be pulled out to another issue, I think.
Right. Moving on to the next one, which is 11893. Internal scripts should be hidden in the inspector. Looks like an old issue. And I see a PR which got landed a week ago or so. Yeah. It's basically how to separate the core internal modules source code and the application source code separately so that you get a seamless debugging experience. Not sure what was the actual reason for putting this as a diagnostic agenda. Looks like Mary has put it.
When was it put in the agenda? It might just be left over from last time.
It was 12 days ago that he added it.
Right. So looks like the discussions around were on the lines of the representation. I mean, looks like in theory, we decided to separate the internal module source code, but how do we show it in the debugger? Looks like that's also been addressed by landing this PR. Not really able to catch in a simple glance because it's a huge PR. So probably worthwhile to keep it as is till next week.
Yeah, it seems to be most of the context lives in Mary's head probably, and she's not here. So
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, probably just push aside for next time.
Okay. So the next one is add IO readies to problematic modules 430.
That's been on the agenda for quite a while.
Yeah, we never got a chance to discuss this because if I remember last week or the previous one, we ended up discussing only in the first section.
Okay, it sounds like Mary, though, had the next action on this. It says keep it open. We can close it once the issues are created, which she was going to try and do that week. That was a few weeks ago, but
yeah, there's the discussion was about like the problematic modules markdown file is not really great. It kind of suggests that these things are bad, which is not ideal. And it's also not super actionable. It just kind of lives in the repo. No one really notices it because it's not an issue. So what we should be doing instead is pull out all the context from it and just make separate issues for it, pointing to like, yeah, like this particular module breaks context for this reason. Here's some description why and what needs to be done to make it work. And yeah, someone just needs to take the time to do that. And then when that is done, then we can remove the file, I guess.
So maybe it's worthwhile to spend some time when we do the deep dive.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one is 148, which is Node CPU profiling roadmap.
Yep. So after spend some time to get the context of all the discussion, it's fair to say the only tool for profiling Node.js cross-platform is the usage of the profiler start and profiler stop. However, these dynamic instrumentations block the event loop because needs to iterate over all functions to map. As said on the working group on the 12.05, V8 has performance issues. However, we don't have any roadmap to solve it. So I re-added this issue on the agenda just to ask and to probably make a tracking issue or roadmap to solve this problem, or if anyone have any concern about it. So I have time to work on this issue, but it's not clear for me since the last roadmap was done. So I guess we need another roadmap to solve this problem.
Yeah, I guess the key thing is like, did we make any progress previously, or is it still the same state as, are we still at the same state as when it was originally opened? From your research, is that the...
Yeah, I will put a link here on the chat about the last work group that discussed about this issue. So I guess after this working group, we don't we close this issue because anyone has time to work on it. So
If I understand correctly, there could be 2 or 3 parts to the problem. One is to understand or standardize the tools and the best practices around profiling diagnostics, profiling based problem determination. Second would be to find any gaps in terms of the capabilities and implement those gaps. And the third one would be doing it in a performance efficient manner. So if I understand correctly, at least the first one has been achieved through the deep dive exercise. We looked at various profiling based scenarios, and looks like we have covered most of the aspects and identified the problem determination aspects and the tools which can be used in each of the scenarios. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, or the...
I think we still have to write that up so that we have like guidance that says, here's how you use them, right? Like the public facing guidance. That's the last step we still need to do, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So once we had that, then it would be, you know, in there must be like, there's potentially some gaps that were being talked about in this roadmap, right? Like that should capture what we believe you could do today and how we'd recommend what you could do today. But then it would be, what's the gap between that and what we'd like to be able to do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Like some of these things I can see is that, you know, it's like dynamically being able to turn it on and off, right? Like that would be, you could see that in the other flows that basically say, you know, well, you've got to start the app profile, then stop the app, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is not a good usage on the production environment because you have some performance issues.
Exactly, yeah.
So, Rafael, do you have access to the deep dive document? I'm just searching for that. I'm not sure how to locate that.
I don't remember. I guess no.
Uh, is it through some issues or?
I would think the link should be in some of the issues or through some of the, like we had meetings, whether they'd be in the invites, the issues for those meetings.
The invite doesn't have it.
So that's where like we haven't closed on we had some good working sessions, but we need to translate those into something that are like consumable from people and visible externally. So maybe we need to follow up with Mary where those are.
Yeah.
I think they're, you know, if it's a Google Doc, I suspect if I went and looked at my Google Doc, I could probably find it as well. But, you know, maybe we need an issue, which is like to group those all together and start the work to get them being captured externally.
Yeah.
So the suggestion is to see the document built in on the deep dive about profiling Node.js, and after this check, create some roadmap to fix some gaps around the profiling.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So the deep dive contains what we believe is the existing capability and what we believe is the standard practice of attacking problems in the performance space that requires profiling. So that can be cross-verified with this roadmap and see how do they tally.
Okay.
What are the gaps, etc. And you can review that. You can come up with set of statements saying that um, you're not happy with the current approach. These are the things that you believe are gaps. These are really production scenarios, and potentially we can incorporate that and then see the actual tooling gaps, and then we can work towards that.
Okay, so I will remove this issue from agenda, and after create the roadmap, I can add it on the next deep dive or on the agenda of the deep dive, right?
Yeah, what I suggest is once we get the Google Docs, I will pass it on to you. You can review the content of the Google Docs specifically on the CPU profiling section in conjunction with the roadmap issue, which is currently tagged, and see how much is overlap, how much is fulfillment, and then we can remove this item from the agenda. You can create a fresh issue with the exact requirement in the preview of the Google Doc.
Okay.
Take a note on that. The last one in the item is stable API, async hook stable API tracking issue.
Yeah, so that's been open for like literally years at this point. And I'm starting to wonder if that even needs to still exist on here with the like mark async resource and async local storage as stable stuff. I'm personally of the opinion that async hooks itself should probably never be stable. It just exposes too much internals and things like that. But we've kind of left it just as like really broad tracking issue just around like the subject in general. And like there is still also the like there is also like potentially some things that async local storage does not solve that async hooks does solve. And if there is, my feeling is that we should identify what those things are and make different APIs for that, not do anything with async hooks for that. So I'm not too sure what we should do with this issue. But related to the general stability of that category of things, though, there is still an open pull request for adding async context handling correctly to an API, which is number 32930. Paste the link in the chat if anyone wants to have a look at it.
Yeah, I've been looking at, I think if it's the one I've been thinking of, we've been talking about that, and yeah, this is the one from Legendcast. So.
Yeah, got an update about a week ago, and then a couple of comments on it. You approved it, and there was
Yep.
some other small comments, but hasn't had further iteration since then. But so yeah,
it is on the team's radar. Like in the NAPI team meetings, we've been touching base, and Legendcast said he'd have some time to try and push it forward.
It would be good to get that one done soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can get a update tomorrow or the
Oh, that's right. I forgot you're here.
But yeah, that I think is one of the remaining issues for having the general concept of context propagation stable. Having this feature in there, having async resource stable so people can start using it. And that's pretty much it. That's somewhat separate from async hooks itself. I don't know if we want to have a discussion about like what we should actually do with this specific tracking issue, if we still want to have that, or if we want to like make another thing that's maybe a little better representative of what the current reality actually is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this needs to be on the agenda. I think we added it back to the agenda when you kind of picked up the async, the lead on that front. But the focus has been more on the things like, async local storage versus making async hook stable itself.
I've made like a bunch of like performance improvements and stuff to async hooks, just as like an underlying mechanic of async local storage. But yeah, I'm still largely of the opinion that async hooks itself just it's not a design that should ever be stable. It
right. I mean, I think
like have substantial changes to be something even remotely safe to be stable, I think.
So I mean, maybe making a comment along those lines that says, you know, that the current team's thoughts are that, you know, this maybe will never be stable. The focus is on, you know, other exposing function, you know, the required APIs through other things like async local storage. You know, we're closing this issue because it's not. There's no current champion that says let's push to make async hook stable, right?
Yeah, I do somewhat feel though that we should ultimately have a goal of removing the async hooks API from like public
Yep.
exposed interface at some point.
Yep.
But I don't know how we want to go ahead with that, especially given that async local storage probably doesn't solve everything that async hooks is doing right now.
Right.
I know Node Clinic does some stuff with it that async local storage doesn't, like it isn't capable of doing. So we should try and figure out like how can we provide what these other modules need in a way that's actually safe.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe like I think you were suggesting opening a new issue that says the current thinking is this, you know, it might just what you've just been talking about, like this, we don't think that, you know, async hooks will ever necessarily become stable. You know, the future direction would be to provide the required functionality through additional APIs. One of them that's already in play is async local storage, but that doesn't cover everything. So we would need to, you know, figure out what other additional APIs are needed. And then finally, the plan would be to deprecate async hooks, right?
Yep. And I'm actually already working towards some parts of that. One of the reasons Clinic uses async hooks directly is for tracking of promise objects, which I have been working towards the promise hook API. Like about a year ago was all just C++ sides, couldn't really interact with it in any usable way at the like user-facing level. I added like JavaScript fastpath version. So if you don't have a destroy hook, then it uses that. I'm working on moving all of it to JavaScript. Part of that is adding this JavaScript function version of the promise hook API to V8, which I mentioned at the start of this meeting. And part of that will be I'm going to change the promise hook class so it can be used from the JavaScript side to wrap the promise objects. So essentially, all of the logic of the native promise hook could be implemented in the JavaScript side. And then when we get to that point, eventually there's the possibility of actually just exposing promise hook directly as a separate API from async hooks, and then async hooks can just be a consumer of it. And to design a promise hook is a lot safer. It's just exposing promise objects. So like you can listen to the response, but you can't really mess with anything it's doing. Right. Whereas like async hooks is handing you raw handles. You can do whatever you want with them, which can be pretty chaotic.
Right. Okay, so it even sounds like you've got other parts of the evolution underway and in mind, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still async hooks like also reports the handles themselves. Like there is useful information to be gathered from what async hooks currently does. So I think we need to identify like what other things are people actually using async hooks for to try and figure out like how can we translate this to a more safe API that is still delivering on what they actually need. Like we have like tracking of like how many active handles there are and like what types are they and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. As we're on top of the hour, the one thing which we wanted to do a couple of weeks back itself, but slipped because of the timing constraints, is to go through the deep dive document, the Google Docs, and discuss on the next actions on that, mostly on the documentation, basically publication. So the way we develop the deep dive document is to brainstorm as a team, cover the entire spectrum of use cases in the production anomalies, and devise the complete diagnostic story with the help of the tools and the methods and the best practices. In some places, it's a complete documentation. In some places, those are providing some hints only. So that needs some pruning activity, needs some splitting, segregation, cleaning, refining, and then formatting so that it can be externally published. So that's the overall activity. I think it's worthwhile to discuss in one sitting itself. So given the fact that it's slipping, probably we should do that as a first item in the next week, next sitting.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. So I will add that item in the agenda in the next sitting. Anything else before we call it a day? Take it as a no. Okay. Then thank you very much for your time. Talk to you in 2 weeks' time.
Talk to everybody later. Bye.